Welcome to Human Monsters. Part 1. Sante Kimes. Sante Kimes was born on July 24th, 1934, in Oklahoma City. She was the product of a biracial marriage of a white woman and an East Indian man. Her father found the pressures of being in an interracial relationship in the Deep South too difficult to bear, and he left the family. She moved with her mother to Los Angeles. Sante and her mother were financially destitute, and her mother turned to prostitution to make the rent. Needless to say, hosting her tricks in her home didn't exactly provide an appropriate environment for Sante and her siblings. According to Sante, some of her mother's clients would sexually abuse her. Her siblings would later report that Sante dished out abuse in her own right. She was particularly fond of burning them with lit matches. She also engaged in animal cruelty, stabbing dogs and goats on the family's farm with safety pins. Sante was able to do these things because her mother was so busy servicing her Johns that there was no time available to supervise her children's activities. Sante was also free to roam the streets of Los Angeles. One of her favorite hangouts was a soda shop. She never had pocket money, but would stare at the treats on display. She eventually manipulated the proprietors, Edwin and Mary Chambers, into giving her some free ice cream and soda by eliciting their sympathy. Eventually, the couple would even give her movie tickets. She would play this card effectively and frequently throughout her life. She charmed the Chambers so much they adopted her, seeing that she hadn't had a proper upbringing. They moved to Carson City, Nevada. Sante was in the 7th grade at the time. Sante had a hard time adjusting to this new circumstance. While Los Angeles had a racially diverse population, the same could not be said for Carson City. And during roll call in school, her classmates would often giggle at the sound of her name. This bullying did not carry on much longer, for after her adoption was finalized, her surname was changed to Chambers. As far as her given name goes, Sante was apparently too exotic for some, so she came to be known as Sandy. She eventually got more comfortable in this environment, and the middle-class surroundings of the Chambers ranch house, which furnished Sante with her own bedroom, further added to her contentment. She had hobbies like skiing, and her adoptive father gave her a car for her 16th birthday. In stark contrast, the pursuits for which she would become notorious later in life, her high school years resembled something out of an Archie comic. She joined the Spanish club. She starred in a school play. She was a cheerleader. She was involved with the 4-H club. However, some of her friends noted that she had a mean streak. She would target some of the weaker students for bullying. She was more popular with boys than with girls. During that time, Sante's birth mother would show up at the Chambers house to beg Sante to return home with her. Sante was not interested. She enjoyed her life in Carson City far more than living in abject poverty with her mother. When Sante graduated in 1952, she initially declared an intention to study journalism in college. She switched rails and announced that she was marrying her high school sweetheart, him being Lee Powers. He enlisted in the military shortly after high school, and Sante followed him as he was deployed to Korea. She did not cotton to the married life and soon divorced him. Sante enrolled in a business school to train to become a secretary, but eventually boredom won out. She conned her friend Ruth into moving with her to Sacramento. Ruth was quite fond of this idea and looked forward to a life that might resemble the sitcom Laverne and Shirley. It didn't work out quite as well, but they were able to get clerical jobs working for the state. Mary Chambers was thankful for Ruth's influence, grateful that Sante didn't follow in her mother's spike-heeled footsteps as a streetwalker. Sante and Ruth moved to the Bay Area. Sante enrolled in a religious school to earn credits to attend university. This did not appeal to Ruth, and she moved back to Nevada. Sante did not complete her studies and returned to Sacramento. In 1956, Sante ran into one of her old boyfriends from high school, Edward Walker. They married in 1957, and she gave birth to her son Kent in 1958. The Walker family were prosperous and happy for a time. Edward provided well with his construction job. It was about that time that Sante became inspired to engage in criminal activity. She came up with the idea of burning down a house Edward had been working on and profit from it in the form of an insurance payout. She succeeded, but all she got was $10,000. Having gotten away with this, she continued to commit crimes. Her crime streak came to an end in 1961 when she was caught shoplifting. Following this, she and Edward separated. She moved back to Los Angeles with Kent in tow. She soon landed a job at a healthcare company called HMO Concepts. The position required that she relocate to Washington, D.C., which she and Kent did. The role involved being a lobbyist. A lobbyist's charge is to convince an elected official to allocate funds and/or enact legislation to benefit the cause for which the lobbyist is advocating. Her position involved occasionally bending the truth or outright lying to accomplish the goals set out for her by the firm. Sante was qualified not just because she was charming and had the gift of gab, but also because she was attractive and would flirt with the politicians. She would also lie, claiming to have contacts in high places to people she had never even met. She went as far as to claim that the Secretary General of the United Nations was her son's godfather. However, this did not represent her dishonest deeds, not by a long shot. She had her eye on a Cadillac and wanted it so badly, she forged a letter from her boss at HMO Concepts, stating that he was going to buy it for her. That, and she forged a check. She presented both to the car dealer, and the caddy was hers. While the salesman was in the washroom, she took the check from his briefcase, ripping off 2 people in one day. Sante was not charged with a crime for this, but she was fired. Soon Sante met Ken Kimes, and having been both equally smitten, they married. How they met is an event that is shrouded in mystery and speculation. What is known is that they first met up in a motel in Palm Springs, California. With Sante at his side, some of his business practices became ethically compromised, and soon he was entangled in litigation. After a failed attempt to capitalize via fraudulent means on the bicentennial celebrations by launching a PR campaign with intentions to befriend individuals among the political elite in Washington, Sante became pregnant with Ken's child. The child was given up for adoption. Speculation has it that the child was a product of an extramarital affair. Being fluent in Spanish, Sante's decision to peruse the streets of Mexico in pursuit of young women to work as domestic servants for her bore fruit. Not only were they forced into domestic slavery once they arrived in America, but she would verbally and physically abuse them if they so much as complained. She also made money from working as a so-called coyote, a person who is paid by undocumented migrants to smuggle them across the border. She made $1,500 per migrant. She would return to shoplifting so that she could obtain some mink coats. She was not convicted because she removed the tags, negating any possibility that they could be traced to their point of origin. There were other technicalities involved that led the judge to dismiss the case. Kenny Kimes Jr. didn't exactly grow up in wholesome circumstances. His parents were engaging in fraudulent activities to advance themselves financially, and there was little time left over for little Kenny. He was mostly raised by his illegal alien nannies. When he was 6 years old, Sante refused to enroll him in kindergarten, insisting he remain at home to be homeschooled with a private tutor. The tutors would report on the life Kenny was living after Sante's crimes gained media exposure. They said he was so sheltered, he possessed little understanding of how relationships worked. It affected his moral code and worldview. Sante did nothing to encourage better behavior and a compassionate view of others. In fact, she would show him books of pictures of people she wished would die or at least suffer. She called those collections her rainbow books. She encouraged him to engage in some kind of psychological voodoo, wherein he was to focus his negative thoughts on them, and, according to Sante, it would cause them to suffer some kind of misfortune. She called it hateful staring, and Kenny would do it habitually. It was around that time that Sante committed her first murder. An elderly aunt of Kenny's refused to cooperate in one of Sante's fraudulent insurance schemes. So she was shown the door to the mausoleum. Sante locked her in a room and seldom fed her. Eventually, the woman's relatives put her in a nursing home, but she was ailing to such a degree by that point that she passed away shortly thereafter. In his adolescence, Kenny Jr. was so desperate for friendship outside the home that he would literally buy companionship, taking a friend to movies or McDonald's and footing the bill. That friendship didn't last. for Sante didn't approve, and she contacted the friend's father, telling him that while Kenny was intelligent and capable, his son was not. She did something similar with his girlfriends. She would call them tramps and do all she could to reroute them out of his life. Kenny became an accomplished liar. When a friend visited their home and asked why there were so many wigs in the house, he told them his mother was undergoing chemotherapy, which wasn't true. April 5th, 1981. Sante and Kenny Sr. got married in Las Vegas. She became a tyrant around the household. Kenny and Kenny Jr. were not allowed to speak unless spoken to in her presence. One of the young women indentured into slavery at Sante's home decided that being deported would be far less unpleasant than being abused by Sante. She climbed the fence and persuaded a neighbor to call the police for her. She was beaten, burned, and suffered other indignities in Sante's home. Another one of her slaves escaped, and the FBI tracked Sante and Kenny down. They were charged with conspiracy to violate peonage and slavery laws. They faced the possibility of serving 10 years in prison and paying tens of thousands of dollars in fines. They were held without bond. Later, Kenny was released on $100,000 bond, but Sante was still denied bond since the complaints were made against her specifically. The case garnered considerable media focus. Additional charges were added: involuntary servitude and transporting illegal aliens, aiding and abetting, and conspiracy. Sante managed to escape from prison. She feigned illness and convinced the staff to take her to a hospital. While there, she persuaded a guard to release her from her cuffs so she could use the washroom. From there, she escaped. February 1986. Sante Kimes was found guilty. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison. She was released in 1989. Soon after being released, Sante made Kenny drop out of high school. The way she saw it, his peers might influence him and make him into something she didn't want him to be. She had him homeschooled with tutors once again. He hated that, and his resentment grew so much over time that he occasionally physically attacked Sante. She wasn't fazed. In fact, she fought back. Nevertheless, he was controlled by his mother. She would always get her way. Sante hired a lawyer to cooperate on an insurance scheme by lighting a house on fire. He disclosed this to a friend while inebriated, and the friend contacted the police shortly thereafter. The lawyer was arrested, but agreed to work undercover until he got irrefutable evidence that Sante and Ken were guilty of arson. Somehow Sante and Ken found out about this and invited him to go with them on vacation to Costa Rica. He was suspicious of their possible motives, though they told him they wanted to bring him along because of his expertise in property law, and they were thinking of buying some land down there. He was never seen again. Ken Sr. died of an aneurysm. In the hospital, Sante made sure to pull rings off his fingers before leaving. When Ken Jr. returned from spring break, He asked where his father was. Sante callously pointed to an urn. He found this more painful than the loss itself. Ken didn't go on to achieve much success. His mother did all she could to inflate his ego and instill in him a superiority complex and a feeling of entitlement. The problem with that mindset is that if the subject is not willing to work to justify their feelings of superiority, then they just come across as arrogant and obnoxious. His mother got him into a university with the right amount of money and connections, but his academic performance did not justify his presence. His altercation with a dorm mate further demonstrated his fish out of water status. That dorm mate was so badly injured they had to be admitted to hospital. Ken was banned from living in the dorms. If anybody criticized him, he would become enraged. He and some friends rented an apartment off campus where they could live and attend classes. Though he did not live with her, Sante found ways to keep tabs on him. His school peers advised him to cut the apron strings, but apparently that was easier said than done. For Sante hosted a keg party in fall of 1995. This period of Ken Jr.'s life continued to unravel when he asked the girlfriend of a friend to watch his cat. The cat relieved itself throughout her apartment, and she was livid. She demanded that he compensate her for it. But people with huge egos feel the world owes them things, not the other way around. He promised he would pay her, but procrastinated and then refused to pay. He decided to leave college altogether. Hence, he fell off the deep end at that point. After Ken Sr.'s death, Sante suspected that he had money stashed away in offshore accounts, and she went to a bank in the Cayman Islands to inquire about this. The vice president could not sign it over to her since her name was not listed on any of the official documents. She could not charm or bully him into releasing the funds. So she killed him. Or at least that's what Ken Jr. said happened. He said he and his mother drugged the man, took him to an undisclosed location, and drowned him in a bathtub, whereupon they tossed him into the ocean. Sante claimed that Ken Jr. made this up. The disappearance of the banker has still not been solved. Sante became known as the Revlon Bandit after trying to shoplift cosmetics at a department store. She threw her purse with the makeup inside of it to Ken Jr. and he ran off. The store detective caught up with him and he was arrested and charged, though he refused to give the police information about himself or his mother. His lawyer posted $10,000 bond. Eventually, the case was thrown out of court. A man named David Kasdan had been stiffed by Sante in a real estate scam, and after confronting her about it, she left him a stiff in a dumpster in Los Angeles, riddled with bullets. Speculation has it that Ken Jr. was involved in this since Kasdan was a heavy-set man and Ken Jr. was a weightlifter. Sante and Ken Jr. decided to relocate to New York for a fresh start. They were driven by a Cuban immigrant named Jose Alvarez. He recalled them having a conversation while driving through Jersey City, New Jersey, that the metropolis would be suitable for dumping a body, and that they didn't sound like they were kidding. While in New York City, they targeted a wealthy widow in her 80s. Once, after a visit to her domicile, Ken Jr. was seen carrying a large, cumbersome suitcase that was dripping blood. The victim's name was Irene Silverman, and Sante intended to steal her identity to the extent of dressing like her. Going to such measures would make it possible, she theorized, to siphon her money to Sante's accounts and take possession of Irene's assets. When the law caught up with Ken Jr., he had a foreign deed with a forged signature of Irene Silverman's name. While on trial, Ken confessed that his mother disabled Irene with a taser, whereupon Ken strangled her to death. This woman, who had lived in the lap of luxury all her life, found her final resting place in a dumpster in New Jersey. He pled guilty and implicated his mother in all the crimes. She denied all charges. Sante Kimes continued to maintain her innocence until her death in 2014 at the age of 79. Part 2. Julie Dixon. March 13th, 2011, Skegness, Lincolnshire, England. A woman dialed 999, the English equivalent of 911. She shouted, "They set fire to the place. He's in the storeroom. I think they've locked him in." The dispatcher asked her to calm down and explain the situation in more detail. The woman said her name was Julie Dixon and that two intruders wearing masks gained entry to the business she owned with her fiancé, David Twigg. They locked him in a closet and set fire to the building while David was trapped inside. That was her story. When the firemen arrived and entered the building, something important caught their eyes: a small container whose innards were burning intensely. Investigating this further, they found a flammable liquid inside. They could smell gasoline. When the firefighters got to the closet where David Twigg was trapped, they found that the doors were locked from outside with a padlock. A fireman broke it off with his axe. David had not been burned, but the internal injuries incurred from smoke inhalation left him unconscious, and he was declared dead in hospital. The police launched an investigation, and they found Julie's explanation of the events to be full of holes. For instance, she claimed they were there to rob the place, but they demanded nothing and left with nothing. It wasn't a product of a vendetta, since David Twigg was not the sort of man to make enemies, certainly not the kind of underworld type that would burn him alive. To clarify the situation, the police probed into Twigg's personal and professional life. The business he owned was co-owned by Julie. He was a talented woodworker who designed and manufactured furniture for high-end clients. Julie ran the office and attended to the financial affairs. The problem was, the business was in poor shape financially, even to the point of bankruptcy. This, despite the fact that not only did they have regular customers, but there were back orders for their products. The business was behind in its taxes, which is not something David would ever have allowed, and it was avoidable given the business's success. According to other people who knew him well, he must not have known that he was so behind in his taxes. David's friends and family were devastated by the loss of David. Julie issued this statement: "I am so numb with pain. My heart is broken. I have not just lost my partner of 15 years, I've lost the love of my life, my best friend, my soulmate." Some of Julie's behavior at the time was strange and inappropriate, like at the funeral. Sometimes at such an occasion, a song might be played that was beloved by the deceased. Julie chose "Red Light Spells Danger" by Billy Ocean. It contains the lyric, "Can't hold out, I'm burning." What did she have in mind for an encore? Disco Inferno? Her other conduct wasn't exactly befitting for an aggrieved widow. She mingled among the attendees, chatting, joking, and laughing, carrying on like it was an episode of The View. Police took a look inside Julie's computer and found some damning internet searches, like "how to kill someone without it showing up in a post-mortem" and "how to disguise tablets in food." Investigators discovered that she'd purchased 2 cans of gasoline the morning of the blaze. She claimed they were for her lawnmower. Julie was brought in for questioning, and though she initially stuck to her original story about the masked robbers, she eventually confessed to setting the fire. She gave as a motive a murder/suicide pact, wherein David would have her kill him because he had lost the will to live. She said she agreed to die with him, but got cold feet at the last minute and fled the fire. She said he asked to be locked in the storage closet so that he could not escape, and his death would be assured. Julie was arrested and charged. Those who knew David well said he was not suicidal. He was happy with his life and very much in love with Julie. The judge did not accept her version of the events. He said, "David Twigg was an amiable, hard-working, and honorable man. What you did to him was evil. There was a significant degree of planning and premeditation." He described her affected grief as worthy of an Oscar. She was sentenced to life, required to serve a minimum of 23 years. Her motive for killing David was never disclosed. Part 3. Teresa Perez. Teresa Perez was a beautiful woman, and she knew it. She also knew she could use that beauty to her advantage in her dealings with men, particularly those with money. When she wasn't sufficiently discreet about it, such a man would realize that his penis was being used like the crank of a slot machine, with the hopes that 3 cherries would yield a jackpot. Many of these men who later found that their money had not been well spent would testify that she was emotionally unstable. She was born Teresa Garrett in Los Angeles in 1963. She grew up in a dysfunctional household. Her parents divorced when she was 3 years old. Teresa and her older sister moved with their father to Zanesville, Ohio. A few years later, their father remarried, and apparently he was a real pushover, for his new wife did not want the girls around, and he capitulated when she insisted they be placed in foster care, which they were. They were assigned to a family close to Columbus. Teresa was remembered as a tomboy who preferred roughhousing to playing with dolls and holding imaginary tea parties. At school, she excelled at athletics, but not nearly as much in academics, with her IQ coming in at 86, which is considered below average intelligence, according to standard testing. When Teresa was 14 years old, she was transferred to the home of Patricia Weitzel, whom she would be close to for the rest of her life. Patricia owned a farm and assigned a horse to Teresa to take ownership of and care for. She became passionate about riding and equestrian pursuits in general. This event preceded the happiest 2 years of her life. This bliss came to an end in 1979 when her father regained custody and brought her to Denver to live with him and his wife. She lived with them for 3 years, and at no point during this time did she get along with her stepmother. 1982. Teresa was kicked out of the house. She was a vagrant with no skills and with her IQ borderline Jehovah's Witness. It was at this time that she met a man named Bob Costello. He was 40 years old and she was dumb enough to be talked into just about anything. So a romance developed. They had a daughter who was raised with Bob until she was 5. By then he realized that Teresa was only after the contents of his wallet. He made a comfortable living, but she was looking for something far more luxurious, so they parted ways. Vincent Rieger was a real estate mogul. Teresa occupied many bedrooms, but the comparison ended there. She met the 66-year-old while working in a sales position at a car dealership. They married in 1988 after Teresa became pregnant. Rieger filed for divorce just 3 weeks after their wedding, citing her violent behavior. They did reconcile after the birth of their son, but the marriage never did entirely recover. She was spending his money like common sense was going out of style, and she aggressed toward him, even going at him with a golf club on one occasion. Within a year, they separated, and Vincent was awarded custody of their son. Teresa was not done ruining people's lives. She met Denver-based realtor Michael Mansfield, 20 years her senior, as she preferred much older men. He wasn't as rich as Vincent, but she drained both his bank accounts and his balls, and possibly his will to live. She pressured him to marry her and then cheated on him. Their marriage hardly lasted a year. Next up, she was practically rocking the cradle when she linked up with Mario Perez, who was only 12 years older than she. They married in 1997. He was a financial analyst who made $90,000 a year. 2 years later, he was unemployed, indebted, and subsisting on $1,200 a month in unemployment benefits. Teresa Perez was like a financial parasite, sucking the life force out of each male victim she targeted. In the case of Mario Perez, she had not only drained his bank accounts, but maxed out his credit cards and forged his signature on checks. She did all this to finance her gambling addiction. She owed money to 12 casinos, amounting to a debt of $48,000. Teresa found someone she intended to use to pay off that debt. His name was Justin Rosen, and he was the owner of the Rosen Novak Ford Agency, where she was working in sales. She began working there while still married to Mario, and she established herself as an apex performer. She used her good looks and flirtatious tendencies to entice male customers into making purchases. The commissions were substantial, but not enough to satisfy her greed. Justin Rosen was become her next sugar daddy. He was 73 years old and loaded. She began flirting with him, and soon she was manipulating him expertly. In fact, when she told him she was divorcing Mario, Justin put her and her teenage daughter up in a luxurious apartment. Justin lavished all sorts of indulgences on Teresa, like a car, expensive gifts, and vacations to exclusive resorts in the Caribbean. Whenever she wanted money, all she had to do was appeal to his carnal nature, and it would be forthcoming. She wanted him to marry her, but there was one major snag. He was already married. Teresa was the other woman. He was still very much in love with his wife and did not intend to leave. They had been married nearly 60 years. Teresa was starting to wear him out, physically and otherwise. He did not have the sex drive or energy surplus of a young man, and her constant demands for money and the goods and services it buys also became tiresome. When Justin was diagnosed with cancer, he decided to end the affair. The first time he decided to pull out of the relationship was when he told her he was uncomfortable visiting her with her daughter there. Teresa solved this problem by sending her daughter to live with her father. When this didn't work, she nagged the man constantly to divorce his wife and choose her. This reached a boiling point on the eve of Justin and his wife's anniversary. The 60th anniversary is frequently referred to as the Diamond Anniversary, and Justin was well aware of this significance, for he and his wife planned a large party to be attended by friends and family. Teresa expected him to cancel and spend the evening with her instead. When he refused, she blew up at him, going into a loud and lengthy tirade. It was at this time that he realized what a psycho hose beast she was and decided to break it off for good. Teresa was not going to grease up his escape hatch. She employed a blackmail campaign as a tactic, claiming to possess a, quote, packet of information, end quote, that she would send to his wife, relatives, and friends. She began stalking him, showing up at restaurants and events. When she did, she would create a scene, calling him a liar, an asshole, and, quote, a dirty Jew, close quote. Justin filed for a restraining order. This only made her crazier. October 3rd, 2003. Just as Justin was pulling into the driveway of his home, Teresa pulled up in front of him and blocked his path. When she got out of her vehicle, she was brandishing a gun. She got into the passenger side of his car and said, "Drive!" Justin's saving grace was that he approached the Denver Gang Bureau, an assembly of police officers. He stopped his vehicle there and got out. As far as Teresa's tank of crazy went, she was not running on fumes, not by a long shot. She jumped out and pursued Justin with her gun. One of the police officers noticed this and ordered her to give up the weapon. She put the gun to her head, threatening to reduce the population of shitty people by 1. Both Justin and the officer presumed the situation was under control. They were mistaken. Teresa turned to Justin, gun still in hand, and fired 11 shots. His corpse, a mascot for why no man should ever have pursued a relationship with Teresa Perez. Incredibly, Teresa wasn't finished raising hell, and she shot at Officer Yoder, a bullet hitting him in the bicep as he leapt for cover. Other officers, recognizing this legitimate threat, fired at Teresa, and she hit the ground dead. Part 4. Anne Browning. This story begins with Bill Williamson, a retired British postal worker. He looked forward to his retirement with his wife Mary by his side in Milford, Surrey. He was in a comfortable position, for in addition to his pension, he had no debts and had saved £250. Mary didn't get to experience those circumstances for long, for in 2004, she passed away at the age of 91. Bill's life felt empty after Mary's death. He had no children and no relatives within the community. He was alone and lonely as a widower. The worst of this would elapse over a period of 3 years. In 2007, Bill attended an event hosted by the Historical Society, and it was there where he met a woman named Anne Browning. She was 54 years old, and he was 82. She had been married twice and had 2 adult sons. She was a self-employed cleaner. They hit it off instantaneously. Assuming he would die alone, Bill didn't expect to fall so hard for Anne. Bill enjoyed having Anne around the house. She cooked and cleaned, tasks that Mary had always taken care of. She didn't accept his offers of financial compensation, though she did ask him for a loan to have dental work done. He gave her the money without hesitation and with no payment schedule in mind. He also reimbursed her for the cost of gas, as she had a lengthy commute to his house. As he saw it, it was money very well spent. On another occasion, she helped him fill out the paperwork to open a bank account. Shortly thereafter, he informed her that he intended to leave the bulk of his estate to her. Relations between the two would not remain nearly as idyllic. Bill was reviewing bank statements when he discovered withdrawals of £200 each. As previously stated, he was a thrifty man, and this sort of thing would never have gone unnoticed. He knew for a fact that he had not made the withdrawals, so he called the bank. They informed him that a second debit card had been issued to the joint account holder, that party being Anne Browning. Bill confronted Anne about the second debit card and the withdrawals. She told him he had authorized the card and that it was to be used in emergencies. She was adamant that she had never used it. She insisted that he must have withdrawn the money for himself and then forgot about it. He could not abide Anne's presence in his life anymore. She not only lied to him, but insinuated that he was too senile to realize she had lied. He was done with Anne Browning, or so he thought. Bill had mixed feelings about this since his friends warned him about her, insisting she was only in it for his money. Still, he wondered if he might have been wrong and blown his chance at finding love again. When he heard she got back together with her ex-husband, that feeling became worse. Now he went back to a life of loneliness. 2009. Anne's reunion with her husband hadn't lasted, and she came back into Bill's life. She was wondering if he would be willing to give them another chance. Despite being warned against it, he was eager to welcome her back, and welcome her back he did. This time around, Anne suggested that they both sell their homes and enjoy the proceeds as a nest egg. He also financed the purchase of a new car for Anne. Anne went on a rampage of shopping, a new wardrobe, tickets to expensive theater shows, and so on. She had £140,000 from Bill's proceeds from the house sale transferred to her checking account. As she was living it up, Bill never appeared in her company. When people questioned her regarding his whereabouts, she would say he was visiting friends or family or scouting retirement homes on the south coast or went to Ireland to attend a family funeral. She was so convincing as a liar, nobody intuited that Browning was full of shit. October 2010, a doctor contacted the Surrey police to report that one of his elderly patients had not been reachable by phone. Bill was due for his annual flu shot, but had been a no-show. The doctor asked the police to run a welfare check. 2 officers arrived on Anne Browning's doorstep. She told them Bill was in Ireland. The police found no evidence that Bill had left the country. They did find evidence that Anne had his money transferred to her account and that she also had ownership of his car transferred to her name. October 8th, a crime scene team arrived at Anne Browning's doorstep, search warrant in hand. In the garden, they discovered a patch of recently disturbed earth. It turned out to be a shallow grave. Bill was naked and had been a victim of assault and battery. He was wrapped in a shower curtain. His feet were bound with a belt. Anne left the house in handcuffs, a charge of murder in her future. The way Anne told it, she and Bill had gotten into an argument during which she lost her temper and beat him to death with a plastic baseball bat. She panicked afterwards and decided to hide the body. As she put it, "The next thing I know, I'm digging a hole in the garden." Anne Browning was sentenced to a minimum of 25 years in prison. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.